Welcome back to the deep dive. So you give us the sources, and our job is to, shortcut the analysis and pull out those key actionable insights you're looking for.
Exactly.
Today, we're getting into something really fascinating. We're looking at the career, the strategy of a global icon. Our source material comes from a key text, The Rise of Rihanna Fenty, or in the original, On Giacici.
Right.
And our mission today is very, very specific. We are diving deep into one particular section. Rihanna Fenty's path to success.
Yes.
So we're not here for a biography. We're here to unpack the architecture of her success, the key decisions, the intentional moves that turned a music career into a multi-billion-dollar empire. We want the roadmap that the text lays out.
And that word roadmap is so important here, isn't it? Because the source doesn't just list her achievements.
Yeah.
It tries to identify these very specific turning points. We're looking for the moments of deliberate choice that, according to the authors, really set her apart. When a source calls it a path, that suggests it wasn't just luck. It suggests it was engineered. So we need to focus on what the source says were the actual, the building blocks of her evolution.
Okay, let's unpack this then, starting with the foundation, section 1 in the source. The defined path to success. This has to be more than the obvious, right? The source calls it a defined path.
It is. And what's really crucial here, what the source highlights right away, is this fundamental shift towards what they call artistic structural leverage.
Okay, let's break that down.
For you, the learner, it basically means she intentionally put creative control and her own image first, way ahead of just maximizing immediate radio hits.
So she was playing the long game from early on.
Exactly. The source points to that period around 2009-2010 where she deliberately stepped away from that more, traditional managed pop star mold.
And that's where it gets really interesting, because the lesser-known detail isn't about the hits themselves. It's about those early high-stakes choices. The source is very specific, that the transition from, say, the Good Girl Gone Bad sound to the much edgier, darker work on Rated R was a huge calculated risk.
It was. And it wasn't just her, expressing herself artistically. The authors argue that this pivot was a foundational strategic move.
How so?
It made sure that her personal brand, her authenticity, became the actual product, not just the singles that were curated for her by a label.
Right. The music was the vehicle, not the destination.
Precisely. And repositioning herself like that gave her this almost untouchable creative platform that she absolutely needed for the pivots that came later. It was a trade-off.
Sacrificing short-term wins for long-term control.
Yes. Sacrificing some of that immediate commercial safety for long-term brand equity. For control.
So if the source is defining this path, it must point to some early signs of this entrepreneurial mindset. Does it mention specific deals or management changes?
Oh, absolutely. The text puts a lot of weight on her evolving relationship with Roc Nation and, of course, Jay-Z, but it really focuses on the shift away from a standard artist-manager deal to one where ownership was everything.
Ownership, that's the key.
That's the key. The source actually cites contract details, arguing that she was building capital, and this is huge, retaining her intellectual property rights much, much earlier than most of her peers.
Wow.
So the surprise here, the real foundation, is that early financial sophistication, that focus on equity and owning her creative output. That became the seed money and the credibility for all the Fenty ventures later on.
See, that's the kind of detail we do this for. It shows the early path wasn't just about selling records.
Not at all.
It was about building an infrastructure, building a machine that could handle a massive pivot into completely different industries down the line.
That is the exact conclusion the source draws. Her music career in this telling of the path becomes this hugely successful proof of concept for her brand. It proved her global reach, but it was never the final destination.
Okay, this is where it gets really good. Let's move into section 2. Synthesizing the elements of success.
Yeah.
You can't talk about Rihanna without talking about the launch of Fenty Beauty and Savage X Fenty.
Of course, the seismic shift.
Right. So how does the source connect her artistic platform to these massive entrepreneurial ventures? It can't just be two separate careers.
No, and the source material is very, very clear on this. These were not parallel projects. They were integrated, one phase building on the next, all part of the same core strategy.
Okay.
The synthesis, the connection, really revolves around two core ideas the source lays out: authenticity transfer and market gap exploitation.
Okay, let's start with authenticity transfer. How did the source claim that her music brand gave her credibility in, of all things, beauty and lingerie?
Well, the authors argued that Rihanna's music, her entire public image, her willingness to be unconventional, to be visually diverse, to push boundaries, it created this level of trust with her audience.
A trust that, say, a traditional corporate brand just doesn't have.
Exactly. So when she launched Fenty Beauty, the source says it wasn't seen as just another celebrity side project. It was seen as a genuine extension of everything she already stood for: self-expression, nonconformity.
So that authenticity was the asset.
It was the single most valuable, intangible asset that she transferred from her music phase into the business phase.
And that leads perfectly into the second idea, market gap exploitation, which I'm guessing is the strategy behind Fenty Beauty's, legendary 50 Shade launch.
Precisely. The source uses that 50 Shade Foundation launch as its primary case study for strategy and action. It wasn't just about launching a product.
Yeah.
It was about launching a product that aggressively filled this massive, glaring hole in the market inclusivity.
Right. A hole that everyone knew was there, but nobody was fixing.
And the source suggests this move did two things at once: strategic differentiation and moral positioning. By making inclusivity the main event, not an afterthought, she simultaneously carved out a unique market share and made her brand culturally essential.
That moment, according to this path the source lays out, was just one of the most brilliant strategic decisions. It proved that the brand could win by being different, not just by being famous.
And what's so fascinating is how the source ties this right back to her first music pivot.
With Rated R.
Yes, because she had already established that creative control, that authentic image, years before. She had the freedom to make a radical, market-disrupting move like the 50 Shade launch.
A traditional, committee-run celebrity brand would probably never risk.
Never. The source uses this to show that the early path was literally designed to maximize the utility of her platform years down the road.
Okay, so let's talk about the next big pivot, Savage X Fenty. The source must apply the same logic to her move into lingerie and apparel, right?
It does, but with a focus on ownership structure and elevation. Unlike Fenty Beauty, which launched into a crowded market, Savage X Fenty went up against an industry dominated by just a few huge players.
Players known for a very, very narrow definition of beauty.
A very narrow one. So the source analyzes the financing structure, and it notes that Rihanna kept a very high degree of control. That allowed her to go with a direct-to-consumer digital model and, again, radical inclusivity in sizing and representation.
So the key decision point here wasn't just the product. It was the commitment to use her brand's authenticity to fundamentally challenge how that industry operated.
Yes. The source cites the focus on body positivity, on diverse models as a direct application of that path to success principle. Find a huge established market and then strategically reroute the whole thing to serve the majority that's been overlooked.
Wow.
The source is explicit here. The success came from her ability to use social media and her cultural power to redefine what lingerie even was, turning it from a product about conforming to a standard into a statement about your own confidence.
So if we connect this defined path back to the bigger picture for you, the learner, what is the source really showing us about strategic leadership? What were those key decision points that show that ability to pivot and adapt?
Well, the ability to pivot, as the source defines it here, it wasn't reactive, it was proactive. It was all part of the plan.
Okay.
The source really highlights two big lessons here. First, knowing when your platform, in this case music, has done its job and should be leveraged into a new, higher growth industry like beauty or fashion.
And the second lesson.
Second, the adaptability wasn't just about changing product lines. It was about strategically finding the failure points in a market, like the beauty industry's lack of inclusivity, and positioning herself as the solution. She didn't follow trends. She exploited weaknesses in the market structure.
That is the core of it, isn't it? A cohesive escalation of power is in the structure.
Yeah.
So we've really analyzed the framework of a path to success based strictly on the source, the rise of Rihanna Fenty. And the value here, it wasn't in the timeline of her hit songs, but in the specific interpretation of those strategic moves and market entries.
Absolutely. We've analyzed that foundational, that entrepreneurial architecture from the source. And I think if you look at the source's interpretation of her success, the single most valuable lesson for a learner is the concept of intentional infrastructure building.
Say more about that.
Every single phase of this path, from the artistic pivot with her music to the ownership structures of her companies, was intentionally designed to build the infrastructure for the next, bigger, more profitable move.
So success wasn't an accident.
Not at all. Success was the result of building this self-reinforcing, globally scalable machine, all anchored in her authenticity.
That idea of a self-reinforcing machine is a really powerful takeaway. It suggests success isn't just about having talent, it's about engineering the infrastructure.
And that leads to a final thought, something that goes a bit beyond the strategic mechanics we've been talking about. Given that the source material focuses so intensely on this defined sequential path to success, the strategic decisions that led to financial success, what aspects of her broader legacy might still need to be explored to really appreciate the full scope of her rise?
That's a great question.
The path focuses on how she became so successful financially, but it kind of leaves open the deeper analysis of the lasting cultural and sociological shifts she created through her commitment to inclusivity.
That is a great thought to leave with. The path gave her the platform, but the legacy is how she permanently reshaped the landscape for everyone else in those industries. Thank you for diving deep with us into the architecture of this phenomenal rise. We'll see you next time.